Okay, so let's say this grid is going to be looking like this. This was our previous shape from the previous video. تمام. This is the second layout. احنا عايزين, what we want to do is that we want to have the label here, the input field here, and the button here. And finally, we have the quit button beneath. تمام. So we're going to create a label or a grid layout. The grid layout is basically columns and rows, right? So we are going to say that the entire window is going to have a one column. The entire window is just one big column, which is going to have an index of what? Index of 0, right? Inside the entire window, inside the root, which is column 0, you are going to create two rows, right? Each frame is going to be its own row, right? So inside the root, we have row 0 and we have row 1. This is supposed to be row 1, okay? So this is row 0 and this is row 1, okay? Inside the frame itself, inside row 1, you're going to have column number 0, column number 1, and column number 3 or number 2. Index of 0, index of 1, index of 2, right? So we're going to separate everything into rows and columns, okay? طيب, let's see how this is going to look like. I'm going to start and take the code from before, and I'm going to create a file using grid. I'm going to paste everything. I'm going to remove the comments just to make some space. Okay, I think this is enough. The first rule that you should know of is that grid actually does not use side or fill or expand. It uses some different stuff. So I'm going to change every back into grid, right? And I'm going to remove every side and fill. And I think there is a side and fill from here as well. We can leave the padding. You can actually remove the expand. Okay, let me just delete this and take this here. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is to configure the columns for the parent and for the inner containers, right? So let's say now that we are going to have in the window just one big column, which is column of 0. So let's say that this is column setup, column, and maybe rows, but now I'm not going to use rows setup. Okay, so I'm just going to say root.column configure, and I'm going to say the following. Now, in the root, you're going to have one big column. That's the window, right? So I'm going to give it index of 0. What do you want to have here? I'm going to configure the weight to be 1. And the values that this weight property takes is basically relative. What I mean by relative is that what if you have 3 columns? Let's say inside this frame, I have 3 columns, right? So if I said the weight here is 1, and the weight here is 1, and the weight here is 2, this means that this column is going to be bigger than these 2. So it's relatively changing based on how many columns you have. So if you say this is 1 and this is 2, this is 1, 1, 2, so it's going to be double the size of these 2, right? For the time being, the root is only one column, so I want it to have weight of 1, meaning that I want the width or the horizontal space of the root to be taking the entire width, the entire horizontal space. Okay, so the column of the root needs to take the entire space. This is 1, right? So let's do the frames. Right after we create the frame 1, I'm going to say column configure. And I'm going to say frame 1 is going to have how many columns? 0, 1, 2, right? So let's say the weight by default is going to be 1. So once I say that I have 3 columns, I want each column of the 3 to have the entire width, the same horizontal space. That's why I'm doing every one of these to be weight of 1. So this is column 1 and this is column 2. Right? For the input frame, how many columns do we have here? For this layout, I chose it to be one column only, so it has an index of 0. So I'm just going to copy this line and put it underneath here. I'm going to change the buttons frame. Okay. Now, if we'll take a look at the current design, let me just. Oh, there is an issue. there is an issue where we forgot to delete the side, I believe. Okay, so currently it looks like this, right? This is the first frame and this is the second frame. So what is the deal? Why everything is stacking vertically? Because we didn't say anything about who should be on the left and who should be on the right. Okay, so what I will do now is that I want, in this is frame 1, by the way. Okay, and frame 1 we said that it has how many columns? It has 3 columns. So I want enter your name, the label, to be in, I want it to be in row 0, in the first row of this frame, at column number 0 as well, right? So I'm going to say for label, for the name label, set it in, notice that it's inside the frame, right? So create a row inside the frame. This is the first row, put it in the first column, which is index of 0, right? So let's see how this is going to look like. Okay, it disappeared, so let's say that this is going to be at the absolute width. Let's continue with the rest. Maybe it's going to appear. So I'm just going to continue with the, oh, that's the input field. I wanted to do this to the name label, like this. Let's try to run this one more time. Okay, so it didn't change that much, so let's try to continue with the second one, the input field. So the input field is going to be in the same row inside the frame, but at the second column, so this is going to be 1, right? And finally we have the greet button. So this is going to be, actually we need to put the greet button above. So I'm just going to take this, place it here, and I want the greet button to be inside frame 1. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to put this at column number 2. So it looks like this now. Okay, so inside frame 1, this is row 0, this is column 0, this is column 1, and this is column 2. Okay, let's continue with the second one. So frame 2, or buttons frame, is going to only have 1 row, and it's going to have only 1 column, so this is column 0. Okay, so this is the current looks of this application, right? One last thing, let me run the sample that we want, the goal that we want to reach. Okay, so this is what we want to have here, is that whenever we stretch, right, we want this input field and this button to stretch with you, right? So let's see how can we do that. Currently this is actually, this doesn't do this for you, right? And there's some padding here. Actually we can add the padding later, so this is not a very big deal, right? So in order to do this, let me see the notes. Okay, so we set the rows and columns. Now we should set the label to the left, set the parent frame to expand. Now we want to do the following. If you run this, you should see, why does it do that? That's رهيب جدا. طيب. Okay, so once you stretch, I want to make sure that this is at the left hand side, right? So to put stuff to the left, to the top, to the right, actually we use something called sticky. Okay, so I'm just going to say that this name label is going to be having an attribute in the grid to be sticky, and I'm going to set the direction to be west, right? This is a little bit weird, but it doesn't use left and right, it uses the directions. So you have west and north and east and stuff like this. Okay, so if I run this, I don't think that's going to work, because we need to make the parent, which is the frame, to say, let's say that the frame now contains half the entire space, right? The entire horizontal space, right? Previously in back, we said that in back you can use expand, so expand takes the entire horizontal space. But to do this in grid, we need to make sure that the frame, the parent, actually is taking a sticky value of east-west. East-west means that it is taking the entire horizontal space from the east to the west, or from the west to the east. Okay, so I think once we do this, we should see that it's stuck at the left. Okay, now you can see actually that there is kind of a spacing between each one, so it's spanning the entire width. The frame itself, the frame is spanning the entire width or horizontal space. Now I want to make this at the left as well, the west as well, so I can go to, or let's say let's make it like this. Let's say that I want to make sure that whenever I stretch, the input field stretches with me and the button stretches with me. So it's the same exact concept. So I can go to the input field and say that I have a sticky of east-west to span the entire horizontal space, and for the grade button the same thing, right? And for the quit button to be the same thing, right? But I think the quit button is inside frame 2, and frame 2 needs to be having this property. It needs to be by default spanning the entire width, and we didn't do that. So if I run this now, right, you should see that this is working. All right, now there's an issue with this spacing here, because you see that enter your name, this label, what is the weight of this column, of column number 0 here inside frame 1? The weight we set to be 1, right? And this weight of input field, this column number 1, the weight is 1, and the weight also in column 2 is 1, right? What we want to say is that in order to make this input field starts from here, this means that enter your name or the label is literally taking the space of the text inside it, right? If it was taking the space of the text inside it, then the input field is going to start exactly from here, right? So to make sure that this is not going to take any extra space, we're going to be a little mean to this column here. And I'm going to say column number 0 is going to be having a weight of 0. Weight of 0 here means that this column, whatever is going to place in column number 0 of index 0, is going to be having exactly the space of the text inside it, right? Maya? Type. If I run this, oh, okay. No. If we run this, you can see that this is what happened, right? So this is now column 0 is taking the exact space of the text, and column number 1 is starting exactly right afterwards of it. Okay, and it's stretching with you because of sticky east-west, right? Type. This is all about the grid, and let's see what we have next. Okay, let's take labels and images. So I'm just going to say labels images.py. Okay, and I'm going to take some boilerplate from here to not repeat everything. And in this example, I'm going to use pack just for simplicity. Okay, so this is my application. I'm going to close this. So this is my app right now, right? So we've taken label before, right? Let's say that we are going to create label. Okay, so ttk.label, and I'm going to associate it with the root, and I'm not going to give it anything actually. So this is going to be my label object, right? Actually, this is going to be an image, right? So I'm just going to call it label image, right? And I'm going to pack this. You can use grid, but for simplicity, I'm just going to say back. And you should see that this is the label. It doesn't contain any text for the minute, but this is the label, right? Now let's see how can we install a library that allows you to insert images. Okay, first of all, this library is called Pillow, and you can install it like this. I think I have the link open. You can search for Pillow, and you can find this link. I will put this link on Moodle, right? So basically, if you have Windows, you can open up your CMD. Right, this terminal right there, and you can run this line if you don't have pip. So if you wrote something like pip and you don't have pip, right, if it showed you anything else beside these, this means that you don't have pip installed. So install pip and run this line to install the library Pillow. Okay, all right, so now I'm going to say from Pillow PLL right? Import two libraries, which is the first one is image and the second one is image. I can't find it from here, but it's image tk. One is going to use to open the image file, and the other is going to be used to convert that file to a representation of the image, to convert it into a photo in another sense, right? So for my image here, I'm going to search for something called flat icon. I think I have this opened. I don't, so whatever. Let's just open it really quickly. So I want an icon for a user, so I'm just going to say account or user or whatever, right? And I'm going to download the first one that I see. I think this is the one. This is the one here, right? So you can download it. I already did this. So I'm going to reveal this folder in the file explorer. And from the other file that I already have here, I'm going to take these two images, okay? And I'm going to create a folder. I can create it from here. I'm going to call it screens, all right? And I'm going to add these into screens, right? So you have these two images here. Tamam? Type. Now, what I will do is that, first of all, we need to import the image. So I'm just going to use this image library that we have imported from here. And I'm going to say .open is the same open function that you use for files that you've taken in programming. And I'm going to specify the path here. The specify of the path is going to be really simple. What is the folder? The folder that you have inside your root directory is screens. And I'm going to enter this user from there. Okay, so I'm just going to say screens. And then forward slashes, double forward slashes. Do you know why is it double? I'm sorry, forward backward slashes. This is a backward slash. It is double because if you did this, it's expecting you to put something like T or any escape character, right? I don't need escape characters. I need the actual backward slash. So I'm just going to make two to make sure that this appears. The first one, this one appears. Okay. So after this, just type the image name, and I'm going to store this in image file. And then after I have all of this, I'm going to use the other library, which is image tk, to create an actual photo of this file, right? Actually, the method is called photo image, and then pass that image file, and here you have your image. It's going to be stored in a variable. I'm going to call it photo. Right? Once I have this photo, actually there is a property on label that says text, and you can write whatever, and there is another property that says image, and I'm going to pass the photo there, right? So if I run this, you're going to see the entire size of this photo, but we can resize it using the resize method. Actually, the resize is on this line. Once you open it, you can resize it afterwards. So I'm just going to call resize, and it takes a tuple of the width and the height. I'm going to make it really, really small. So the width is going to be 30, and it's going to be squared like this. And this is your image. What if you want to have some text beside your image? Actually, you can, as I've said before, and as we've seen in the previous video, you can put some text, something like user, like that, right? But the question here, what is going to be shown? Is it going to show in the text or the image? Well, let's try and run this. You're going to see that the text never appears. It's actually there, but it's behind the image, right? So if you want to have text and image in the same label, you can actually use a property called compound, and we actually compound targets the text. Compound targets the image, because this is the outlier to me. This is the new element here. So I'm going to say compound and take that image and put it to the right. Okay, so if I run this, you can see that the image came to the right. Okay, so this is, I think this is all about the images. Resize, compound, updating. Yes, let's take another example. If you want to update a certain text, let's say that I want to change this later on for some reason. Maybe you will do it statically, like the way I'm going to do it, or dynamically. And it's going to be dynamically on most of the cases. Yeah. So from this label image, instead of saying user, I want to change the property of text to be super user. So you can access that property just like any other key. Guys, by the way, this is a small an element inside dictionary, right? So this element inside a very big dictionary, inside this label property or this label object, this element, it has this key and it has this value, right? So you can access the property the same way that you access keys using what? The square brackets here, right? So I can call that property and I want to set its new value to something like super user. Okay, so it's going to be changed like that, right? If you want to change the image as well, you can do the same thing. Let me grab another image, and I have two images in that folder. Actually, the second image actually is called install pillow. Oh my god. Okay, so this is the second image, and I'm going to update the image property, okay, with what, with that photo. So if you run this, did we change something? Image 1 doesn't exist. No, I need to understand what's happening here. Okay, that's really strange. So you can update both? And that's really bad design. Okay, so I think this is how tk-enter works. So if you want to update an image property and the text property in tk-enter for the label object, I think you need to start, if you're going to change both of them, then you're going to start with the image first. Update the image, then update the text. For some reason, if this is reversed, this is not going to work. Okay, so if you're updating both image and text, start with updating the image first. Okay, but this is images and labels, or how to insert images via labels. Let's take text areas and buttons. Let's create text areas.py, and I'm going to use this boilerplate here. Okay, I don't need this. Okay, right, so this is my current window. Let's create a text area. Text area is basically a bigger input field. We've seen before ttk.entry. Entry is a small input field, right? So let's create ttk or tk dot text area. It's called text, just text. And I'm going to associate this with the root, and I'm going to give it a height of 8 rows like that. I'm going to call this text area object. Okay, شباب انتوا معايا؟ طيب احمد ركز عشان انا بقول الكلام ده لاول مره. You can ask لو انت مش فاهم, you can ask يعني. تمام. I'm going to use packing for the alignment or the layout, just for simplicity, to not configure any columns or rows. And once you hit run, you're going to see that this is your text area. Okay, all right. Let's have another. Okay. By the way, if you did remember last video or last session, I told you that you can use TK and TTK interchangeably. But there are some differences in the styling. Yeah, in the styling aspect. You can add foreground or background to some pieces of TK, but not TTK, right? One of the major differences as well is that TTK, if you did this, I think this is not gonna work. But let me just close the current window. Yes, it's going to tell you that TTK doesn't have an object property. So you can't create, it doesn't have a text object property. Right, so it cannot create a text out of TTK, but if you work on TK, the text is going to appear for you. So keep this in mind, right? I'm going to use TTK for creating a button, and I'm going to associate this with the root, give it a value. Let's say, for example, grab text, right? And I'm going to give it a function inside this command property to fire whenever you click on this button. And I'm going to call this get content, right? And note that this command property takes the function body, so you cannot place the call like this, just the function definition. And I'm going to put this inside a variable that is called grab button, right? So grab button is going to be backed as well, and I'm going to say that the function is going to be called get content. which is just going to grab the content and display it. But I'm not going to show you how to do that for the minute. So this is the current looks. This button doesn't do anything. Now let's say if the user inputted something, right, we want to grab it. Okay, so first of all, we can do the following. Let's say that I'm going to print whatever is inserted inside this text area, right? So you can just use the text area object and say get. Remember, I told you everything has a getter and setter, so you can just use the get in this object, right? So if we did this, if you write anything, take a look at the terminal. Text area missing one argument. No. هو في ايه؟ Oh, I totally forgot about that. طيب شباب بصوا معايا كده. The thing is about get, the getter for the text area, it needs some special arguments. It needs two arguments, in fact. It needs the start and it needs the end, right? So if I run this, let me just make it. What the fuck? Okay, so let me just do this for now. Okay, and I want to introduce you to some kind of mechanic or mechanism in this text area. This text area, anything that starts in this text area starts at line 1, right? And this character is going to be at index of 0, and this character is going to be line 1 at index of 1, and so on. Okay, so we want to make sure that we are grabbing everything starting line 1 and at index of 0, right? So this is the start, and I want this to go until the end. I have no idea. I searched about this. I have no idea why the developers chose this mechanism. Okay, but this is the first line, and this is character 0, the first character. Okay, so if I run this and I type anything, you should see that this is the result in the terminal, like that. Okay, type. We can actually insert something. Let's say that at the beginning I want to have a message that say please enter something, like this, right? So we can use something called insert, and the same mechanism as well. I want to insert starting line 1 and index of 0. Okay, and then I want to insert anything, something like please enter your name, or enter anything. It's not an input field, so enter anything. Okay, so if I run this, and you can see that this is the start, and actually it prints it in the terminal. Actually, I need the quit button because I can't really close it manually every time. So I'm just going to add a quit button, and this is going to be back, and this is going to be root. Oh, I did this edit in the wrong file. Anyways, okay. Type. Now let's make a button that grabs the element or grabs the content and then place it underneath in some kind of a label or a different element. Okay, so I'm going to make a button to grab the content. Yes, let me just discuss this before that. All right, so what we did so far is that we said that any content is going to be grabbed and displayed in the terminal, but there is a flaw with this design. What is the flaw of this get content function, in your opinion? If you take a closer look, what does this content do? What does this function works on? What object does it works on? Text area, right? What if I have two text areas? Like this, like text area 1 and text area 2. So now we have two text areas, right? So how are you going to accommodate this change? Are you going to add like a function or make a function for text area 1 and text area 2 and so on? That's not practical. So what can be done is that I can't say that this takes an argument, this takes a parameter, and it actually takes امم it will be removed once we get to events. دي هقولها بعد ما اخلص ده على طول. يعني for the time being لما تكليك once you yes for the time being once you click it doesn't remove anything, so you need to remove it manually and start typing. I'm going to modify this in just a second. تمام. طيب so what I was saying is that this get content needs to be dynamic for any text area object out there. Okay, so I'm just going to say that this accepts a text area object regardless of if it was named text area or text area 1. Okay, and once I have this text area object, I can say that I'm going to access it. I'm going to access it and say get the content out of it. تمام. All right, the problem is that command here, any button, it has a command property. The command property actually expects you to send the function body, but not something like this. You cannot say that I'm sending the function body and I'm sending the text area object that I want to access, which is the argument here, this actual text area, right? You cannot do this. Okay, so in order to accommodate the function body and the argument that it needs, we are actually going to need another library that is called func_tool. This is a misspelling that هتتشال في editing ما علينا. طيب, from func_tools, right, we are going to need a library that is called partials or partial, right? So I'm going to use partial and send it two things. I'm going to say command actually expect from me the function. So this is the function. Okay, so it takes a tuple. This is the function body, comma, this is the argument that this function body takes. Is this clear? Okay, so if you're going to send a function that actually needs an argument, then use partial and say that this is the function body that I'm sending, comma, the element or the argument that it needs. If I run this, you should see that there is no problem so far, and if I type this, you can see that the input or the type text actually appears in the terminal. Now let's say that we are going to make a button. I think this is number 5, button to get content in the terminal. All right, so let's make another button. I'm going to say that this is grab button into element. Let's just make it simple. Grab button 2. I'm going to pack it here. I'm going to say that grab text into another element like this. Okay, so if we run that, we should see that this is the button. Now what I will do is that I'm going to have a label underneath this button, so whenever you write something, this content is going to be shown inside this label. Okay, so I'm going to make another function. Well, let's create the label first. So underneath of this button, associated with the root, don't give it anything for the moment, okay, and say that this is going to be my output label, and I'm going to pack it into the window. Okay, so the second function is going to work like this. Let's put it here. Let's call it grab content into element. So now this function takes two things. It takes the source text area object. This is from where you're taking the content of, right? And it takes what? The target element. Let's just call it target, right? So this is going to be my source. I'm going to grab the content from this text area object, okay? And I'm going to place it into this output label that I placed beneath this button. So this is my target. All right, so I'm going to use these. So source text area object, get the content starting from the start till the end. Once you have this content, right, place it into a variable. I can do this in one shot, but I think the screen is not going to be enough. Take the content and from that target access the text property. Remember, I did this just in a second, right? So access the text property and place that content inside of it. تمام? Is this clear? محمد معايا؟ طيب. So let's say now that the command from the second button is going to need get content into element. That's the new function. But this new function actually takes two things. It takes the source text area, and it takes also the target, which is basically the output label, right? But I think it is showing that it cannot find it because it's defined underneath. So I'm just going to bring this up like this. معايا عبد الله؟ طيب. If we run this now, if you type anything, grab text, this is going to show it in the terminal. If you click on this, you're going to see this right there. So actually let me create the label or the output before the button here, before we use it. So this is not going to be undefined. I can find it. And let me pack it beneath the button. So this way we have some kind of an order here. تمام? So if I write anything, you're going to see that this is the output. تمام? Okay, so what we're going to do now is going to be a little bit advanced. So please bear with me. تمام? What we are going to do is work with something called event. The idea. It's no. Facebook integration and GUI is totally optional. If you want to use this, you don't actually have to implement the other one. If you want to implement both, you can implement both. You're not talking about the project. You're just saying how different the yes, it is totally different. For Facebook integration, remember you are connecting this to something that is running on the cloud in the internet. So, but your application is not running on the internet; it's local. So for your application, your local application to reach the internet, you need to have some gateway. This gateway is a web server. فهنشتغل على web servers. يعني هتhost الابلكيشن بتاعك على server. You remember this local host that appears in any website? You remember local host from the first lab in the semester? So you're going to host your website locally. We're going to use a tunneling application عشان instead of this local host, once ان انت بتدي اللينك ده للtunneling application هيطلع لك actual URL. تمام؟ كأنه بيهوست for you on the internet من غير ما تعمل اي حاجه، من غير ما تجيب مثلا virtual machine من الكلاود ولا حاجه، هو بيعمل لك التانلينج ده لوحده. Once the application بقى hosted, it can reach Facebook. So the code is really different. And I'm actually thinking about not giving this session عشان ما اعقدش الناس اكتر من كده. I think I should stick to one thing. يعني how you have GUI, right? That's enough. But I will see how can you accommodate. How well are you going to accommodate? I'm afraid to overwhelm everyone, so I'm going to discuss this with Dr. Ahmed. Yeah. تمام؟ Once you no, the event is basically once you click this, please enter, anything should be removed. That's the event, right? So I'm going to create another script. Hopefully we get to finish this now. Text area events.py. Okay, so I'm going to close this file and I'm going to take this with me. There was a scroll bars part بس أكيد مش هلحق أدي في scroll bars. Okay, so let's close this and let's take the same code. Actually, maybe I'm going to use it, but I think we can remove some stuff that we don't really need. يعني the second text area, I don't need it. تمام. No, you can do it in the same script. I'm just doing this because I don't want to have a very large script. مش هتفهم حاجة وأنا شغال. تمام. And I can stick to only one button. I don't need two buttons here. So I'm just going to stick to this grab button. And the output label is there, and we're good to go. Okay, so this is what we have. Now, what we are going to do is the following. First of all, if you type anything, this is going to appear. That's cool. Now we want to, whenever we click on this text area object, we want everything to be removed. تمام? طيب. So we're going to work with something called, this is number 1, establishing bindings. Okay, so this is your text area object, right? That we have created out of this text class. So I'm just going to say text area dot bind, and after bind you are going to specify 2 arguments. The first argument is the event. What is the event here? Yes, the click is actually called whenever if there's an input field in web development generally, if there is an input field and you want to click on it, this is called focusing. So you're going to focus and have a cursor there at this input field or text area. So we want to say focus in. Once you focus in, right, do something. Do something. This is where the function is going to become here. Right? So focus in, actually, why did I write this camel case like this, or capitalized from here and capitalized from here, and why is there angle brackets? That's the syntax, right? Yes, that's a syntax for this bind. Any binding event has a syntax, right? So if you go to this link, which I'm going to provide to you, you can find that the bind method takes a couple of events here. You can have the event for focus in. You can have the event for, if you want to, for example, if you want to click on enter, like if I have this and I click on enter on the keyboard, it should simulate the same thing as clicking on the button, right? So the event of clicking on enter in your keyboard is actually referred to as return. Tamam? Right? So I'm going to show you one thing before. Oh, let's do this. Let's do this. Tamam? So focus in, and I'm going to say that this is going to be my function that is going to be fired once this event is triggered. Right? This is called in most languages a callback function, right? So a callback function is basically a function that gets fired once an event has happened, right? So this event happens, now call back whatever you want to do once this event happens, right? So this function, I'm going to say that it is called clear text, right? And I'm going to say, what is the text area object? This is the text area object, right? So I'm going to say grab it, like the same way you have insert, you have what? Delete, and I'm going to delete everything from the start till the end. Okay, but there's a thing. Remember, in object oriented, any method inside any class start with the word itself, right? Remember this? The same exact narrative applies here. Any method that is used in a callback function for bind requires a positional argument that is not going to change. You're not going to place values for this argument, but it needs to be there, which is called E. It can be called anything, actually. Some people call it E, some people call it event, right? And this event object, actually, you can access it and you can do some stuff with it. I'm going to show it to you, right? But the bottom line is, any method that you're going to pass, any function that you're going to pass as a callback to this bind method needs to be having this positional argument at the beginning. Right? This doesn't mean, this one here doesn't mean that it's going to be having an equivalent argument. You're not going to pass an equivalent argument for this, but it needs to be there, right? So if I ask you, does this function takes any arguments or not? You should say no, because that's something that needs to be preserved for the event object. Okay? So if we run this, now if I click here, you should see that this text has vanished. Okay? Let me show you another thing. You can actually attach multiple events to the same what? Object, right? So let's say to the same text area, I'm going to do something like this, right? Once I right click, okay? Right click on the button on the right, يا جماعة, and the mouse, right? So once we click on this, you can actually find this event of right clicking via an event called button 3. Do you know why is it 3? تعظيم صح, exactly. The left button is 1, so it's button 1. The scroll bar, actually it was not for the scroll bar. زمان قوي, in the old days the mouses actually had 3 buttons, right? So the one in the middle is 2, the right hand side is 3. انا متفاجئ ان انت لقيتها يعني ايه؟ No, is the start is 1. If you want to have the right click or the left click, which is the main one, the main click, so this is 1. No, I'm not talking about the text area object. I'm just talking about the event from the mouse event, right? And this button here doesn't refer to the buttons in the interface. Button 1 refers to the left hand side, right? Button 2 refers to the scroll bar on the mouse. Button 3 refers to the right click of the mouse. Okay, type. So once we click on this button, let's make a different function that is, I don't know, says something like print that prints the get value. Okay, and it takes event since it's a binding function, so it's going to grab the same text area and I'm going to use get, so get everything from the start, right? I'm going to print this to the terminal like that. Okay, so let me try and run this. Now every time that you right click anywhere in this text object like this, I think we did something wrong. We didn't attach the function, we attached the wrong function. Okay, so if we right clicked anywhere inside this text area, you should see that it is actually printing the first element. We didn't say end to grab the whole thing. Okay, so now right click anywhere here, you're going to see that this is printed. The callback function is fired and you get the values and it's printed. If you right click anywhere else, it's not going to work. It depends on the object that you're. Yes. ايه تاني كده؟ exactly, the left click, which is the focus in, removes the writing. You can actually use button 1 here, but focus in is more widely used for input fields. تمام? Okay. So that's the get value. I want to show you the event object because we never talked about it, and I doubt that you're going to use it for your application. But basically, if you want, for example, if you clicked in this pixel area, maybe you want to get the coordinate of the x and y at this position, or this position, or this position. So you can do this easily with this event. Notice that every event has its own parameters inside the event object, right? So if I have the event to be a mouse click, right, this event object should have something like this. It can contain a property called x, and it can contain a property called y. Maybe if you have a game or something, maybe this is going to be making a difference, right? So if I run this, click anywhere, right, you should see that what is being printed is the x value and the y value of the mouse itself, right? But I don't think that this is going to be existent for the same event if we are right clicking or left clicking or focusing. So if I did something like this here, like print event x, and I left clicked, it prints something really understandable. Not understandable, that's a different value. I think it's an ASCII equivalent for something. But the point is that no, it's printing something, but it's not understandable for us. No, it's not about the text. It's not about that there's nothing there. But I think it because every event has its own properties. So every event object, if it was a button click, then it might have x and y. If the event is focus in, then it might not have x and y, or it might have it with a different kind of return value. تمام? طيب. The last thing that we want to introduce is that I'm going to remove this. This is not a good design, because if I created multiple text areas, like we have seen before, text area 1 and text area 2, now you are going to need a function that operates on text area 1 as well, right? Right? Exactly. This is not a good design, so this is what I'm going to do. Pass any generic text area object and work on it. Right? So we're going to say that clear text takes a text area. هي البساطة بتتحرك كام؟ bonus. I just need a couple of 5 minutes بس. تمام؟ طيب. I'm going to say that it takes a text area object regardless of the text area itself. And once I have the text area passed to me, I'm going to delete it. Now notice clear text takes how many arguments? 1. The event, you don't pass anything for the event, so it takes only 1 argument here, which is the text area object. تمام؟ طيب. Remember the partial from functooth? We said that in the command of the button, you can actually use partial to pass the function body and the arguments that it takes, right? But unfortunately, we can do this with bind. I can't say here partial and I can't say partial and I will send something like the actual function definition and then the argument that it needs. Here the argument that it needs is the text area. If I did something like this, it is not going to work. It's going to tell you that there is an error. بتقول ايه يا احمد؟ لا هي موجودة. clear text لا انت قصدك ان هو يعني وانا بكتب it did it auto complete partial for me. Well, that's not the reason. This is just an autocomplete issue. But bind does not take يعني function with arguments like this. There is a different way to do it, and this is where we are going to introduce the hardest topics, the hardest topic of the year. I'm just going to create a IPYMB. And I'm going to create a Jupyter notebook to test this really quickly. Right now, what we did so far, whenever we wanted to define a function, we said define. Let's say this function is going to be called increment. Right, and it takes any variable, right? It takes any variable, and then let's say it returns what? This value incremented by 1, right? So if I try to call this and give it something like 2, it's going to return 3. Now I'm going to show you something called lambdas, right? Lambdas, if you ever heard about it, basically it's a single line nameless function. Exactly, it's a function that does not have a name and it is written in one line. This is exactly the case that we need lambdas here, right? I want to pass the function body and the argument that it needs in just one line, right? Lambdas is the fit for me, right? So let's write the same exact function but using lambdas. Yes. So let's say here that I'm going to create a lambda and I'm going to say, notice the syntax, lambda takes the parameter. How many parameters does this take? 1. So I'm just going to call it A. It can be anything. And then you place a colon. After the colon, you type what? The actual expression. What does the function do? It adds 1 plus 1 or A plus 1, right? So A plus 1. This is what it does, right? The problem with this is that lambdas, since it is nameless, it needs some kind of a container. So you need to place lambdas inside variables. So I'm just going to place this inside X, for example, right? If I didn't place it, look at what is going to be returned. It says that this is a function, but it doesn't actually say anything. There's no name here, right? So I'm just going to say X equal like this. And this is your function. The function actually now is placed in this variable, so it's an alias for the function. So this means, I know this might look weird, but actually I can use the variable as a function and call it and give it the A value, the A argument, the A placeholder argument here. So I can give it something like 3, and it should work the same, right? Previously we said that you can have default parameters, so you can say A equal 9 or 1 in case that the user, whenever he called increment, did not place any argument. So if we said increment, it should understand that the default is 1, so it's going to return 2. We can have default arguments as well in lambdas, and I'm going to say that A by default is going to be what? 1. So if I didn't place anything, once I call this variable that contains the function, it should return what? 2. Tamam? Is this clear? Like, what I will do now is that I will say that I will place a lambda, I will pass this clear text as a lambda. So I'm going to do the following. I'm going to say, first of all, the parameter. How many parameters does this clear text have? Literally, it has 2, right? So I'm going to say event. That's the first one, and you need to stick to the same namings, to the same names that you have defined here, right? After the parameters, maybe I didn't show you this, but if I have this, for example, add, and I say that it takes A and B, right? These are 2, right? So you can actually say add like this. All right. Lambdas, if you want to have multiple parameters, just the same thing. Place in between just a comma, and this is the second parameter, initialized with what? With 1. So it's going to return, let's say A plus B in this case. It's going to return 2. Okay. So the same thing here. This is the first parameter, this is the second, and now we have a colon. Now I want this bind function to take what? The function body, right? Inside that function body, you are placing here. I'm going to place the same parameters like that, like this. This is the syntax now, right? And to place the actual arguments of the text area object, notice that we are talking about text area here. So to place the actual value of the argument, I'm just going to set it as a default parameter for this guy, for this parameter. So I'm going to say that the default value for this text area object is going to be that text area. Okay? Once I do this, you should see the same exact behavior, but now you can actually do the same event for multiple using the same method, using the same method, which is basically clear text for any kind of object. So if I have text area 2, for example, like this, I can apply the same clear text function on it, but just pass that object like this. Okay, so if I run this, I think I didn't pack it. Yes, every time you're going to write the lambda, but the point is I don't need to. If you did this, then use the variable inside in this area here. Yes, exactly. You can place this lambda once in a variable, right? Put it here and put it there and put it anywhere. Okay, so why am I having this 3 times? You just need text area 2. If I did this here, it will work. No, we did something wrong. And هنا بعتنا text area. المفروض يبقى على text area 2. معلش. So this and this should work like that. تمام؟ طيب, I finished my lab.
Okay, so I'm going to continue the part that I didn't get to finish at the lab at the campus. So what we did so far, if I run this, you'll see that we have created 2 text area objects. This is the first and this is the second. Both of them has the focus in event, and the focus in basically means that whenever you click on a text area like this, for example, like this is the focus in. So you see a cursor here, this is the focus in event. What we said that once we click on this text area object, the one here at the top, you will see that this lambda function fires, right? And this lambda function was a single line function that we used in order to pass a function body that contains an argument, right? We've seen that in a button, to pass a function body with an argument, like for example get content into element, it takes 2 arguments. If you want to do something like this, you can't just simply use the command for that. You need some kind of a wrapper for you to send the function body along with the actual argument or values that it needs. And this is where we needed the partial, but this is for the button and the command property. Things are slightly different with the bind method. So the bind method says that it needs the event and it needs the function body that it's going to be used as a callback to get fired once this event happens on this object. Okay, so the problem was that you can't really use partial here. If you just went few seconds or few minutes in the video earlier, you're going to see that I mentioned that you can't use partial in the second argument position here in this bind method. So you can't use partial to send the function body with the arguments that it needs, right? So we use something called a lambda function, which is just a nameless single line function definition, right? So I said that this is going to be a lambda and it needs 2 parameters, event and text area, right? After the colon, we said that this is the function body and it takes the same 2 parameters, event and text area object, right? And then we said that the actual argument, the actual value, the actual object that I'm operating on is basically that text area that I'm currently actually binding the event to right now, right? Which is this one that I've created above here, okay? And I've created another one, text area 2, and I did another event for it, just focus in, like that, right? And I used the same exact method, and I passed this object to it, the second text area object to it. Okay, the beautiful thing about using this approach is that, as we've mentioned previously, that you can use this method for anything. This method does not have to be statically defined for a single kind of text area object, whether it's text area 2 or text area 1 or text area 3. It can be any text area object, right? So using the same method with multiple events on multiple different objects is a very good approach, and this is what we implemented. So I'm just going to do one more thing. Let's say that I'm just going to remove that text area object 2 because I want just to make things a little bit clearer, right? So if I run this, you should see that we have only one text area object. Now what I want to do is that whenever I click and write something and I hit enter, I should see the text showing here. Now we have the same behavior happening via the button, right? So if I clicked on the button, you should see what? You should see this text right there in this output label. I want to simulate the same exact behavior, but using an enter key click from the keyboard, right? So whenever I click on enter, I should see the same exact result in this text label, right? Alright, so let's see how can we do that. I'm going to use the same text area object, but in this case I'm going to use a different event, and the event is going to be called return, as I've mentioned. So return is used for entering, or it simulates the key, the enter key from your keyboard, right? Alright, so what we will use for this is slightly different. We're not going to use the same clear text. I'm just going to use a similar function that we've used before, which is define get content. Right, so I'm just going to use this function over again, but it's going to be different since it is based on events. Now the name is really long, so I'm just going to say get content event based. Right, so I told you that any method that is going, or any function that is going to be sent as a callback to the bind in the second argument here, it needs to be a function that is compatible with events, meaning that it should have a predefined positional argument called event that you never actually pass any value to it, but it needs to be there, like self and object oriented for any class, right, for any method in any class, right? So I'm just going to say that this is the same function. It is going to be the same, but I'm just going to say that it takes event, and the same approach or the same logic applies. I'm going to send the source text area object. Once I give it, I'm going to grab the content and I'm going to paste it in the target object that I'm going to be sending, which is a label, the output label from here. All right. Okay, so once we're done, now I can do the same lambda, and I'm going to say that these two parameters, these three parameters, are my parameters for the get content event based function, and this get content event based function takes the same three parameters. I just want to make them in one line, right? And finally, we're going to pass the actual arguments, the values for these two. So where are you taking the source text from this text area object, the one that I'm operating on? So this is the default argument text area object. And where are you pasting this? Where are you sending this to the target, which is basically the output label? So I'm just going to send the output label, right? But I think we need to define or initialize the output label above, so it does know that this is called output. There's something called output, right? So if I run this, and if I, of course, this is the first event, which is basically if you click, it's going to clear. We've seen this. Click and you clear. Now if I typed enter, you should see that the output is appearing here. All right. Okay, one last thing that I want to introduce is scroll bars. So let's see how can we create a scroll bar. First of all, I'm going to be using the grid system here, not the pack. So I'm just going to use grid here. Let's create a text area first. So I'm just going to associate the scroll bar to a text area. You can associate a scroll bar to any object. It doesn't have to be a text area, but I'm going to use a text area in this case. You can associate it to an entire frame, to the root, to anything, right? But I'm just going to use a text area for simplicity. I'm going to use tk the text, and I'm going to associate this with the root, and I'm going to say text area dot grid, and I'm going to insert this text area at row 1, right, at column, for example, I'm sorry, at row 0, at column 0. So let's see this. You should see that this is the entire text area, but if we stretch, it doesn't stretch with you. So let's say that the text area is going to be created with a specific slight modification, so it has a height of 8 rows because that's really big. And let's create a scroll bar. So I'm just going to use ttk for that, scroll bar, and I'm going to associate it with the root for the minute, and I'm going to choose the orientation of it to be vertical. You can choose it to be vertical like this one, or horizontal, right? So I'm just going to say that it is going to be vertical, and I'm going to store this in scroll bar, and I'm going to say that scroll bar that grid, and I want basically to have two columns in the root in the main window to have a column that contains that text area, right, like this, a column that contains the text area, and another column beside of it that needs to be really small that only contains the scroll bar. So I have, for example, column 0 and column 1, right? So I'm just going to say that this is going to be at the same row 1, the same row as the text area, but at column of 1, and let's see what this looks like. So this is what we mean by that. Okay, so let's add some column configuration setup. So let's say column and row configuration setup. Now I want to say that this column, right, should take the entire width of the screen, the horizontal width of the screen. So this column of 0, right, should take the entire width of the screen. But column of 1, I need it only to take the width of the scroll bar. So I'm not going to give it a weight of 1. I need it to have a weight of 0, just as we mentioned earlier, to have the exact width of the scroll bar, right? So I'm just going to say that inside the root, I'm going to use column configure, and I'm going to say that column of index 0 is going to be having a weight of 1. This is the text area, so I want it to have the entire horizontal space. But column of index of 1, which the text which has the scroll bar, is going to have the weight of 0. But now if I run this, you should expect that the width of the text area to be spanning the entire, to be filling the entire horizontal space. This is what we mean by weight of 1, right? And we did this. But if you stretch, you're not going to see that it is stretching with you along the x-axis or the width of the screen or the window, right? So to make this stretchable, I'm just going to say that the text area is going to have a sticky from east to west to make it stretch alongside the entire window like this. All right, now I need it always. Maybe I can do the same thing for the row, right? From the row perspective, the row that this text area is in, I need it to be taking the entire vertical space, right? So I'm going to say this, but this is going to be for row configure, right? And I only have one row that contains both of the text area, and next to it the scroll bar, and I want to have a weight of 1. This should put it, I think, in the middle or the center of the screen if you just expanded it, but it's not going to fill the entire window, the entire vertical window, right? So if you wanted to fill the entire vertical space, you should do the same thing from the opposite direction perspective, meaning that we stretch it from left to right. Now it is time to stretch it from top to bottom or from north to south, right? So if you add this like this, you can see that now it is stretching right to left and top to bottom, right? But I don't like that top to bottom thing, so I'm just going to remove it, and I'm going to stick to left to right, and I will be happy with just having it at the middle, the center, at the middle of the vertical space like this, right? All right, so let's say we are going to do the same thing for the scroll bar. If you see, you can see that it is really tiny, but I want it to be fulfilling the entire vertical space. So I'm just going to say that this is going to be sticky, and I'm going to give it north south like that. Okay, like this. All right. So now what we will do is we are going to do something called by, or we are going to add a by directional association. And it's not the kind of association that you see in UML and object oriented, but I'm going to tell you what exactly this means. Now there is a bidirectional, let me call it bidirectional link, right, between the scroll bar and the object that is going to be interacting with it, right? So what I want to see is that whenever I type something here, right, once the cursor is moving down, right? I want to link this cursor moving object or this cursor position in the text area with the scroll bar, right? So I want to say whenever the scroll bar is clicked like this, the cursor will go up, and whenever the scroll bar is clicked like this, the cursor is going to go down, right? So I'm going to associate this via a command property, and the command property is really similar to the one we've seen in the button, right? So I'm just going to say once we click on the scroll bar up or down, I want to associate this with the position of the text area's y-axis, or as they call in Tiki-Enter, the y view, right? So if I run this and if I type anything like this, right, like that, and if I clicked on up like this, you can see that the text area is moving up with me, and if I go down, you can see the text area is going down with me. So this is the first link. Now the other link from the other point of view, or from the point of view of the text area, is that whenever we click down, right, like that, we want to make sure that the cursor is actually getting the position of the scroll bar to be aligned with it, right? So whenever we are scrolling down, or we are clicking on enter and going down along the y-axis of the text area, I want to see that this scroll bar is moving with me. So I want to map the position of the cursor's y-axis coordinate with the scroll bar's y-axis coordinate, right? So to do this, we are going to link from the other way around. So I'm going to say from the text area's perspective, I'm going to use something called y scroll command. I don't know if it's y scroll command or y command scroll. Let me just pause. Yes, it is y scroll command, right? And I want to say when we click down or go down along the road in the text area, when the cursor is going down, I want to make sure that the same position is reflected in the scroll bar, right? So I want to map this to the scroll bar position or y-axis. Now you would wonder that yes, maybe we need the getter here, and this makes sense to use the getter, but for some reason the developers of this library thought that they're not going to use a get, they're going to use a set method for that, right? Or a set property even, right? It's not even a method, right? So this gets you the current position of the scroll bar and puts it or assign it to the current position of the cursor in the text area, right? So if we run this, you can see now that if you go down, you can see that this scroll bar is actually interacting with your position, okay? And this is it.